Another edition of the Outside Shots podcast presented by thelines.com. My name is Eli Hershkovich. You can follow me on Twitter at Eli Hershkovich. You can follow The Lines on Twitter at The Lines US. The guest to my right, I believe virtually, Wes Reynolds of VSiN at Wes Reynolds 1 on Twitter. Be sure to follow him, one of the best college basketball minds out there. The VSiN host of Live Bet Tonight in Las Vegas. It airs Monday through Friday, Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 p.m. Pacific time. And before we get started, reminder to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications whenever a new episode of Outside Shots or any sports betting market discussed by thelines.com is released. We're also giving away a $25 Amazon gift card in our daily college hoops pick'em contest. For more details, head over to play.thelines.com. And you can join the Lines Discord channel to get notifications whenever any one of our staff members places a bet, including my college basketball conference tournament futures, which is the main focus of this podcast, with Wes Reynolds previewing Champ Week here on Outside Shots, recording on Monday, March 6th. What's going on, Wes?
How are you, Eli? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, doing well, and you are too, as I see on Twitter and hear about on VSiN. You're crushing it in the college basketball betting contest on the network. So before we get started looking into conference tournament futures, we'll go through the Power 6 conferences along with giving out another team outside or another future bet outside of those 6 main conferences. But why don't you give our audience a little bit of background on what's going on in the VSiN college basketball contest?
Yeah, I was glad and finally had a perfect week, 5-0 this weekend, because this contest, which we do, Matt Newman sets it up. We did a Friday football invitational with Matt on the late Friday show, which is called Saturday Bet Prep. That's 9 to 12 Pacific, 12 to 3 Eastern, and had a group of pro bettors and whatnot and bookmakers that would submit 5 plays in terms of both NFL and college. You could use sides, totals, or you can go all NFL or all college or a mixed match of both. So he wanted to do something for college basketball. So what we do is you pick 5 plays. Now, this is harder to do actually for college basketball because there's like 150 games on an average Saturday. So it's like, do I pick the right 5? Because I'm going to have, and I know you're going to have, and probably a lot of members of your audience, we're going to have more than 5 plays, depending on how the day is going. It is tough to narrow that down. And I play a little bit higher of a volume because I'm doing first halves and I'm doing second halves and maybe trying to middle. Sometimes you got to buy off a spot if you bet something and then an injury comes along. So, that's what we've been doing. Now, this week it's going to be a little tricky because we're not going to know half the games for Saturday, because typically by about 3 p.m., we usually get lines either from DraftKings or Circa. There's usually a couple lines out in the market. So you got about a 2-hour window to get those picks in before we have to get them ready for the show. So, everybody's been doing pretty solid. We had a really great week across the board. Our man Will Hill at Not The Will Hill on Twitter is leading. Jim Root of 3-Man Weave, he has been doing very well. Rex Byers, Greg Peterson, my colleague Tim Murray at VSiN. So Aaron Moore also, who is a sports bettor, who's actually a professor at Rider University, but is a college basketball junkie. So everybody killed it last week. We finally had it. Like some weeks, it's like 1 or 2 guys do well, a couple guys don't do well, but everybody did well across the board last week.
Yeah, you mentioned Rider. I wouldn't count them out of their conference tournament. Maybe we'll talk about them later on in the podcast. But obviously, big shouts to all those guys at VSiN. You mentioned Jim Root, one of the better college basketball minds out there. A lot of great college basketball content all over the place in the space, and hopefully you guys have enjoyed the Outside Shots podcast as we've been getting it rolling again over the last few weeks. But Wes, tipping things off here with the ACC and going through the odds that are available for this conference tournament as I pull them up on our website. Reminder, you can head over to thelines.com to get the best of the number. Wes mentioned DraftKings releasing odds, and obviously the rest of the major legal sports books, or at least nationwide legal sports books, Caesars, FanDuel, BetMGM, and Bet Rivers Sugar House, all on thelines.com to price shop at. So Duke is the favorite at every single of those books. Best number you can get on Duke is plus 290. Then Virginia plus 300. The Hoos tying with Miami or having a co-share of the regular season title in this conference. The Canes are next up, plus 340. UNC plus 650. Don't necessarily agree with that price. Clemson tied with UNC at DraftKings plus 650. Then it's NC State, the three-headed backcourt led by Traquavion Smith at plus 1,200. Pitt, which had a shot to get the co-share with UVA, but lost to Miami on Saturday. Right, yeah, getting blitzed by Mike Bray in his final home game. Then he decided to go to a bar right after that to celebrate it. And then so on and so forth in the conference. You can, again, check out the rest of the odds at thelines.com. So, Wes, what number or what team sticks out to you if you're considering a bet, or maybe a team that you just think is flat out overvalued and you might target to fade on a game-by-game basis?
Yeah, once again, for the second consecutive year, I absolutely hate this league. I think that this league has not been that great. And I think if you look at the Ken Pom when he does the conference ratings, they're ranked 7th because we consider it a Power 6, right, Eli? The college football Power 5 plus the Big East. And the ACC is ranked 7th. It's rated below the Mountain West. And I don't disagree with that. I think the Mountain West has been a better league, really, this year. But when I look at this and Duke is the favorite, I mean, it's not your typical Duke team. I actually think that they're justified as the favorite when you look at how, if you're judging teams in terms of the way that they've played like the last 3-4 weeks, I think Duke has probably been the most consistent with 6 games in a row. They haven't been pretty. This is not a team that's particularly like a great shooting team from the outside. They don't have like that big scorer, except for Filipowski down low, but they don't have that guard that they always seem to have, whether it's, a Barrett or a Jason Williams or JJ Redick, or go on with the amount of great Duke guards that they've had.
John Shire.
They haven't had that all year. Pardon?
John Shire, too.
John Shire, absolutely, the first-year head coach. But what I've been impressed with Duke, and this is what has really surprised me about this team, they've been pretty darn good defensively. And usually Duke is so young with a lot of first-year freshmen and, more recently transfer portal. They've been really good defensively. They're number 2 in effective field goal percentage in the league. They don't foul, or they don't get called for fouls, depending on your perspective and how you view Duke and how they're officiated. They're number 2 in 2-point defense. They've obviously got size down low with Filipowski and Lively, and also the Northwestern transfer. So I've been really impressed with really how they've played. I think this conference is a little bit of a crapshoot conference. Miami has been the best offense, I think, by far this season, and that's why I think makes them so dangerous, because they go up tempo. They have a good point guard, Nigel Pack. Of course, they bring Wong. They bring back a lot of the core that made that run to the Elite Eight before they got beat by Kansas. But this conference, I'm trying to figure out one. I don't have a bet yet in terms of a future in this conference. But I think when you let in the open about North Carolina, I hate that price. And I think you're already getting taxed, where it's like, okay, the Heels, everybody's going to have them in the bracketology, either last 4 in or first 4 out. I'd have them out of the tournament. After they lost to Duke, I was like, that was your chance. That was your chance to, I think, lock in or be very comfortable with an NCAA tournament bid. And they didn't get it done at home, quite frankly. So that's one thing I think the audience should keep in mind, in terms of betting these conference tournaments, either game by game or futures. A lot of the need to win teams or the must win teams are taxed in. You're already paying a tax in the number from the opener, plus the way that the betting market is going to bet it accordingly. So keep that in mind. Some of these teams, they play their way in here in championship week, but some of these teams, not everyone is going to win in a must-win situation. Some of them are going to play their way out. So I would be careful. Like, I would not bet. Could North Carolina win the ACC tournament? Sure, they could get hot. Virginia Tech did last year, but gosh, I don't want to bet them at 6-1 or plus 650.
You know what's wild too, and I want to touch on Duke, an interesting counterpoint, and it's cool that we not necessarily disagree on Duke. It's not like you were making the case to bet Duke, but just the way they played. down the stretch here, winners of 6 straight outright, like you mentioned. But going back to UNC over at FanDuel Sportsbook, this is wild to me. I saw this last night. UNC is priced at, again, you mentioned a team in the Tar Heels, not in the field right now, at least I think according to a lot of good bracketologists, I don't think Lenardi has him in the field, not to call him out, but you get what I'm saying. And if you listen to this podcast in the past, you understand my criticism of some of those major brand name bracketologists. Right. But UNC plus 2,800 to make the Final Four at FanDuel Sportsbook. 2 teams tied at the same number. San Diego State, which is guaranteed to make the tournament, and a much better profile to make a deeper run in March, not just because of the fact that, again, they're in the field automatically. North Carolina is not. West Virginia, similar number, and they're likely already in. Now, it's not necessarily guaranteed, but going off of those last 2 wins at Iowa State. They should be. Yeah. So for North Carolina to have the same odds to make the Final Four as those 2 teams is bizarre to me. But I want to go back and actually, before I go on to Duke, like, what's your immediate reaction when you hear that? I know, and you said this as well, UNC, the title favorite entering the season. So it's not just the fact that they likely have to go on a deep run at the least in the ACC tournament to make the NCAA tournament. All those priors are baked into this number as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that, look, you're always going to get some kind of futures liability on the favorite. I think maybe it's not as much as we think, but there were people very high on North Carolina. And look, in terms of the preseason polls, you almost had to, at least in the ACC, maybe not nationally, pick them first just because they were bringing 4 starters back from a national runner-up team. So it's like, okay, they're at least more of a known commodity rather than a lot of the rest of the market. But yeah, I think North Carolina, I think that's a brand name thing. And I think maybe that's some books afraid to put such a big price out there because you will have bettors, I think, at this time of year that will take shots on premium teams. Right. Whether it's a Kentucky or a Duke or one of really the blue bloods in college basketball. So maybe they'll take a shot at North Carolina. But yeah, I don't think, and it's not that I'm long on San Diego State or West Virginia and making a really super deep run. Everything is matchup and draw specific. But yeah, I think it's ridiculous that North Carolina is priced that short in terms of making the Final Four. I mean, they lose that first game. Maybe they win that first game and they make it to the quarterfinals. I mean, they could. I still think that they need to win at least a couple games in this ACC tournament. They probably need to get to the semis, maybe even the conference final in Greensboro. I think to say, okay, we have a little bit of a case because there's going to be a couple teams that do that play their way in a conference tournament, and then there's going to be a couple that play their way out. Yeah, no doubt, man. Good breakdown of UNC there and just the market as a whole. But I want to get back to Duke. So I was doing some digging again, around plus 280, plus 290 is the best number you can find on Duke to win the ACC tournament, the favorite as of this Monday recording. 26.32% implied probability based off of those odds. And you mentioned RJ Barrett, that team that last won the ACC tournament back in 2019 was the Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, Cam Reddish-led Duke team that got a lot of breaks, to say the least. I know we could probably talk about that for a long time. They got a lot of breaks in that NCAA tournament to even get to the Elite Eight. And Michigan State, luckily, and for my sake, and I think for years, knocked them out. But looking at this, there we go. Looking at this Duke team and how they're constructed, I agree with you that they're much better defensively than your prototypical Coach K-led Duke team, and I think that has a lot to do with John Shire, who, to me, is a much better coach from a schematic standpoint. Yes. But this team is still very freshman-laden, and Duke has started to make this sort of a push and make this late-season run because Tyrese Proctor has taken over the lead guard duties. But 2 glaring concerns for me, and I'll have a full ACC write-up on Duke over at thelines.com. I believe it's going to come out around midnight Eastern time on Tuesday morning, Monday night, however you want to look at the time there. But a couple of concerns for me. Number one, Duke ranks
number 265 in three-point scoring rate across college basketball. So teams, including ACC teams, conference foes in the ACC tournament, can throw matchup zones against them a lot, kind of similar to that 2019 Duke team, and it can be effective to an extent. Turnovers are also a big concern for Duke, along with a couple other teams that we'll hit on this podcast, Wes, because they're averaging the second highest turnover rate in conference play, and Proctor is a big part of that. So considering they don't shoot the three ball well, and they rely on dribble penetration and isolation offense to produce, and granted, they can get a lot of those points in transition, and the turnover bug can be a big-time worrisome factor for the Blue Devils, too. So those variables in mind, I don't think the price tag is warranted.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to bet it. I think that they're probably the justifiable favorite just because of recent form, but I share your same concerns. And then also, defensively, as good as they have been, they don't really force a lot of turnovers either. So you feel like they're almost not taking advantage of their superior talent and their superior athleticism because, you know, I would think that a young team like this, and John Shire's elected to, I think, value half-court defense, a young team like this, it kind of feels like you want them to run a little bit more and get a little more tempo. They're 293 in tempo. You don't usually see that necessarily with the Duke team, but I think maybe he is doing that because of what you said just a moment ago. This is not a very good shooting Duke team. This is not a team that has a dead-eye three-point shooter necessarily. What are they, 239th in the country, 32.9%? That's not what you usually see out of Duke. So I think they're the justifiable favorite. I don't know if they're the justifiable bet is what I would say on this team.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm sure people want us to stop talking about the Blue Bloods between UNC and Duke. But just one last quick note. You can find it in my preview. You mentioned Virginia Tech made the run to the ACC tournament title and beating Duke in the title last season. You can make the case for Virginia Tech, but to me, this team is not the same defensively as we saw last year, and that's kind of baked into the number as well. Now, they're not nearly playing nearly as well either, but ranking outside of the top 100 in adjusted defensive efficiency, I'm probably not going to bet this number, even though it's a big, sexy price tag at plus 4,500-ish to win the conference tournament, but I'm not there with that.
They might be the only long shot, though, that I would take a chance with here in the ACC because I don't like Wake Forest. I think they've been disappointing. They're not a very good defensive team. They can score, but they can't guard anybody. And speaking of a team that can't guard anybody is Syracuse. And I know people are going to be like, oh, Cuse has done it before. Yeah. They've made a run in this tournament. Yes, but did you watch their last four games against did you watch their game at Pittsburgh? Did you watch their game against Georgia Tech? That team has no interest in playing defense. And I mean, when you got teams like Pittsburgh and Georgia Tech making like 16 and 17 threes against you, Pitt's a little bit better from the three, but Georgia Tech can't shoot in the ocean. And they scored 96 on them in the dome up there in Syracuse. So yeah, this conference is one of the harder ones, I think, to project, but so that's why maybe Duke default favorite, but I think Virginia at 3-1, probably because if you believe defense travels and you go by default, who's a better defense in the conference than them?
Yeah, no, I think I got a little lucky, not to say it was Minnesota Vikings lucky in terms of winning the conference. Granted, the Vikings won the NFC North title outright, but the Who's were a bit lucky to be conference regular season champs, and I cashed that, or at least I got a little piece of that, plus 700.
You and me both, yep.
There we go. So nice winner for us over the weekend, beating Louisville. I figured that was going to happen, but still, it's a little concerning heading into the game on Saturday just because you need the win. But luckily for us, like you mentioned, Notre Dame squashed Pitt earlier in the week, which set UVA up for a shot to get a share of the ACC title, and they came through for us on Saturday.